Optimizing for maximum brain development. So the question often comes up what one should optimize for, if one should optimize towards one thing. And recently I had this idea, what if I optimize for brain development? Of course, this would be hard to measure. Maybe one would have to take multiple tests of, brain development, but also then it is hard to measure the different areas of brain development. But if one thinks about a certain thing, and one thinks about this thing as, what would be the result of me doing this thing or not doing this thing, then one often already kind of has a suspicion. And even if one doesn't, then one at least can try something. Of course, there is the opportunity cost that comes associated with trying something, at least in terms of the time, and also maybe in terms of the otherwise bound resources by trying this thing. But optimizing for, so this seems to be kind of the vector that I actually, to a certain extent at least, am searching for, at least until in 3 weeks I then have something else, which I think is the only thing that I should optimize for. So, the brain development would, so currently I am thinking mostly that, this is a bad way to begin a sentence. Nonetheless, what I'm trying to say here is that it seems that the main constraint in my life right now is basically how developed my brain is. Now, at a given genetic, basically at a genetic result that then resulted in my brain development, of course there are also these factors there are factors which I cannot really control. Some of it might be genetics, and then there might be factors which I partially might be able to control. Basically me, the agent, system 2 thinking in my overall body, which then the rest of it would be system 1 thinking as coined by Daniel Kahneman. So now, if I think about this, and if I think about what I should do as system 2 and to try to get my body to a basically better state and to a better state in the future, then maybe I should optimize for maximum brain development, which could mean that I try to basically encounter the thing that seems the hardest. So now, what would be the thing that is the hardest? I recently had one idea, or I also discussed this already in a video, where I modeled the decisions in life with a tunnel, a 3D tunnel, and the tunnel is underground, which offers the benefit that you can go into any direction, whereas above the surface you cannot really go into any direction because below you is the ground, and of course you could dig a tunnel, but digging a tunnel would be harder compared to running, and also flying would be harder compared to running or walking. So the tunnel offers, or the joint juncture, basically tunnel juncture underground, offers the benefit that you have tunnels which point into certain directions, and having these tunnels that lead up would per step require a marginal unit of effort, or more effort the steeper it goes, compared to basically going neutral, which would also require some effort, but it would require more effort still than going down. So if one opens up Instagram, then one is in a downward spiral also, because we use the spatial dimension, I think, to represent basically going up, so basically a positive change, whereas going down often represents a negative change. But if one now thinks about choice architecture, then one could say that one should try to judge basically all of these different tunnels and to try to move the ones that in the long term basically improve one's life. One should try to bring them to level, or even to underground, not underground, but to even bring them at a decline, so it is very easy, comparably easy, to do the thing that is actually useful, and to bring all the others up. So this could be by having 10 different blockers for TikTok, for example, which then would make it harder to get into the tunnel that actually requires less effort per step. So now, going back to optimizing for brain development. Often it seems that one is faced with a situation in which going down is easier than going up to a certain extent, obviously, because then the marginal unit of effort which is required per step is again higher if you go upwards, or even if you try to dig basically directly above you, which would be the vector that points directly above you. Now, if one optimizes for maximum brain development, one could therefore say in this three-dimensional model that actually one attempts to go at the tunnel which one thinks has the highest utility, but it still is pointing upwards, for example. So it requires the most effort, but the most effort would also sometimes be associated, at least maybe not always, but sometimes maybe be associated with also the highest return for the effort. So by choosing the tunnel that is going up, one could therefore kind of choose the brain development again. So if one is presented with a certain amount of options, this could be, for example, do I now go additionally to the supermarket because I'm a little bit hungry for this one food, or one chooses the harder option, then probably one is kind of optimizing this decision for brain development by foregoing and maybe fasting, because one then, in terms of now representing this in a two-dimensional way, where the upward movement in terms of the joint juncture, so we have a joint and then we have the juncture, and then we have bimodal decisions, such as going to the supermarket again and not going to the supermarket, or just, let's just say something that's obviously kind of not very useful, eating a less healthy option, because the healthiness of the food is already implied in the definition of healthy, so I don't have to explain this further, I think. And therefore, by choosing a healthier version of something, again implied, then one is improving its life, and so therefore the version of oneself one is in the future will never be the version of oneself that is going down this one path, but will always be the version that in this bimodal decision is going actually up. So this would allow us to now retrospectively, but also already right now, because the option is already deemed less healthier compared to the healthier option, this would allow us to improve ourselves, and at any future joint juncture in this decision matrix, not necessarily matrix, but joint juncture graph that represents now all of the decisions of one's life, one basically could be at a higher state, at an improved state at any future one, which then would probably be a positive change, an absolute positive change in this regard also. And so now one could, at least if one can foresee or try to predict basically the outcome of these options and how they would be interpreted in this bimodal model, where going up would be positive and going down would be negative change, one could therefore model this. And so if one thinks about a certain situation, one could then choose the vector that probably has the highest utility, but also might have some associated cost with it. In terms of the tunnel model, it would be going up, and so this would maybe then be optimizing for brain development. And so the result of this would be that at any given future state of, so let's just say, okay, in 1 year, if I chose in these 100 situations or in these 1,000 situations, I chose the thing that I kind of feared would be the thing I actually would need to choose, but I kind of didn't, then, or even if I just approximated this one tunnel, for example, by maybe not taking the tunnel that is looking very dark, but by taking, or in this case, very up, but by taking the tunnel that is just going a little bit into the direction, maybe it leads into a similar direction compared to now watching TikTok, then one could basically limit the constraintness that comes out of the lack of brain development compared to the one version of oneself that opted for the at least predicted path that led to a higher or improved brain development.